hurts. This is my new power carving workbench, and I want to start by talking about why I felt the need to make it. I've got two main reasons and one minor reason. The first reason is power carving makes a huge mess. So either you take it outside, in which case it would be nice to have a portable workbench that has all the clamping abilities of a normal workbench that you can take outside with you, or you've got to have some way of making the dust collection effective. So the problem with dust collection is when you're using the grinder, the dust is coming off, perpendicular to wherever the contact of the wheel is. So as you're moving around, it's spraying dust in all different directions. And so if your hood is just in one spot, you either gotta move the hood as you're working, or you gotta reposition the workpiece constantly, and you're moving around constantly trying to get into the hood, and it becomes a whole affair. But what if you had the workpiece clamped down and the workbench could spin around? So you'd have the hood in one spot, and you stay in one spot, and you just keep rotating it around as you need it, and it will keep spraying the dust in the same direction. The second reason is this is my workbench. It's very sturdy, solid, but it is what it is. It's not adjustable in any way to different situations. And power carving presents a lot of weird situations, at least for things that I've been working on. And so I find with power carving, it's pretty easy to do, but you get the best results when your body is in a good position and your arms aren't extended out in weird ways and like up, especially in your elbow way up high. Like that doesn't work very well. So if you had a workbench that was height adjustable and even could tilt to different angles, that would let you work in a lot more comfortable positions. And then finally, the minor reason is you can remove an awful lot of material very quickly by accident with one of these things. And so power carving on my main workbench is not the greatest thing to be doing. I did not make this workbench to be a show pony. It's here to be used and get beat up. I have no problem with it getting beat up. It's all scratched up and beat up in that. I have no problem with that. But putting deep gouges into the middle of this, when I also do assembling on here, is kind of a problem. So I would like to have a surface that I don't care if it gets beat up. I don't care if it gets all gouged. And this thing already has its first battle scar just from the first project, so that's a good start. Before we get into the details, I want to thank Arbortech for sponsoring this video. They sent me one of the turbo planes to try out, so you're going to be seeing that in future videos. And you've seen me using their mini grinder in numerous videos over the past couple of years. I always get questions about it. If you're serious about power carving, you should really check out their lineup. I would have more of their tools if I had more money. So I figure we'll start from the top and work our way down. And I wanted to show you an example of a weird clamping situation, because I wanted to make this top as flexible as possible for clamping different weird things. Let's get that out of the way. These are Veritas Wonder Pups, Wonder Dogs. Very handy. So it has a vise, it has dog holes, and it has these slots. And the slots, you can get a clamp in there to clamp something in the middle, but it's a little less useful because there's big trunnions in the way of getting to over here. You can get it out here and out this way. The top is made from, I think, 6 2x4s, and so it's about, I think it's 2 3/4 inches thick. That's where it ended up, and it's 28 inches this way, and it's 28 including the vise. And I think that's a little bit bigger than it really needs to be, but I wanted to use this vise, which I had used on my old workbench, saying it's just been lying around, And when this is closed, the end of the vice screw is almost touching the post. So it can't be any shorter this way. And so it's kind of symmetrical around. Both of these lengths are the same, even though the post is kind of over this way a little bit. You could make this top out of plywood instead of solid wood, which would be a lot easier if you just glue it up together out of, say, 2 or 3 layers of plywood. I do think there are some big advantages to using solid wood, though. You can build in these slots basically for free just by cutting 3 pieces instead of 1 long piece. And the way the top tilts, it hits that post. So I've actually notched out the middle section of this top to fit around the top of the post, which would be quite a bit more difficult with a plywood top. The table is connected to these massive Baltic birch trunnions. Unfortunately, those are not the first trunnions that I made. This is the first one, or one of the first ones anyway. And the plan was I was going to be standing here telling you how you could make the whole top section of this from 1 sheet of 5/8 plywood. If you didn't want to make a solid wood top, you could make a plywood top, and half of the sheet would go into the trunnions and the box that goes around the post, and the other half could be used for the top. But that didn't quite work out. The trunnions are attached to the top with dowels, and that worked out fine, and I got it on there and took it apart a couple of times while I was testing things out. And then when I went to glue it on, it got stuck. And I was wailing on this thing with the dead blow mallet to persuade it to go on there, and it would not be persuaded. What it did do was disintegrate. It started to just come apart on the top here, because the only place you can hit it is up here. And so it just started to come apart, and I screwed it back together, but it kind of compromised the strength a little bit. And when I had this on there with the weight of the vise, it was, this is what's supporting it. And so I put this slot a little too low. It could have been up a little bit higher, and that would have made this part thicker. So I probably could have gotten away with it, but life is too short for cheap plywood. So I went with the Baltic birch, and I made it way oversized to not take any chances the second time around. So the way the trunnions are made is I wanted a square that a circle would fit into, and I took the 2 layers of plywood and I folded it over on itself like a reverse book match. And so when you fold it over like that, it kind of reverses whatever cup and twist is in it. So they're opposing each other, and you end up with something that's flatter than what you started with, usually. So on the square, I marked the diagonals, and that showed me where to start and stop this slot, because I wanted the table to tilt 45 degrees in each direction. The first time around, I did not use the router to cut the outside of the trunnion because I needed that square reference to run the square through the table saw to cut it in half. The second time I did use the router, but I just went 3/4 of the way through, so that way I still had the square reference, but I had that perfect circle that makes it work more smoothly. So then I just used the bandsaw to cut it off afterwards, and then a flush trim bit to bring that even with the rest of it. You also have the opportunity to use a dowel jig on one of these boards before it gets glued into the top to create the holes that line up with holes in the trunnion. The downside of a solid wood top is that it expands and contracts. So this table is going to get narrower and wider with the seasons. And that means that the trunnions are going to get closer together and farther apart. So I've left some space between the trunnion and this box, so that as this moves up at the top here, whatever small amount that it's going to move, it's not going to get stuck tight against this box when it shrinks. But because of that space, that allows the whole table to twist in here, and that makes it bind. And so I've added some little strips down at the bottom here that you can't really see from this angle. But that fills up the space down at the bottom and it keeps it from twisting. And it works a lot smoother with those. Now the trunnions are held up by these trunnion supports, which are just the corners from the square that the trunnion came out of, with chopped off a little bit. And those are attached to this box. The box is a tight fit around the post. It's screwed together on 3 corners, and this fourth corner, this side is a little bit shorter than the opposite side, which allows this knob to tighten this together and adjust the tension for the amount of friction of the box against the post. So on the inside of this piece, I made a mortise right over here. And I put a block of hardwood in there. And I tapped holes. So there's a piece of threaded rod epoxied into this knob, which threads into those that tapped hole. For the knobs that lock the tilt, there's a bolt on with the head of the bolt on the inside of the box. So I mortised around for the head of the bolt into the inside of this piece. Now once I replaced these trunnions with Baltic birch, which is hardwood, I didn't like the fact that there was the softwood of this plywood bearing against the head of that bolt when everything else was hardwood or metal. So I used a big Forstner bit to drill through the outside of the board down to the point where the head of the bolt is. And I made a piece of hardwood, it was hickory, which is really hard, to go in to plug that hole. And on the inside face of it, I made a counterbore for a washer. So the head of the bolt bears against that washer, which bears against the hickory, which then goes through some fender washers in between the trunnion and that, and then through the trunnion to another fender washer to the T-nut. So it's all hardwood or metal. So I don't know if that really helped anything, but it made me feel good. This post is 4-inch PVC, and it's filled with concrete, as well as the base being concrete. And I haven't weighed this, but it's got to be at least 60 pounds. And so this does not tip over very easily. I drilled holes for a bolt for height adjustment. And the reason that it's not just a pin in here, I've got this ring, is the box has corners. And so as the corner would come around to the pin, it would just fall through. So it's got to have a ring to support it all the way around. So I've got 10 inches of height adjustment here. Underneath the concrete is 2 layers of 3/8 plywood, which I happen to have. Again, gluing 2 layers together makes it flatter than one thicker layer would be. So the pipe is connected to the plywood with a flange, And then there's also threaded rod acting as a rebar going from the pipe into this concrete, so it connects the concrete inside the pipe to the concrete outside of the pipe, so it's not just that plastic flange holding this onto the bottom. Now I happened to get carried away and fill in the concrete in the post before I did the concrete on the outside, so that's not as good of a connection as it could have been. Ideally you would do all the concrete at the same time. Now it's important to note that PVC pipe is not perfectly round, so after the concrete was set up, I power carved the pipe to make it round. And so I used this go no-go gauge and fitting that around and just testing as I went along. Wherever it wouldn't fit, I removed some material. So it doesn't have to be perfectly smooth. You just want to get rid of all the high spots so the box can turn around here freely. I've also added this, what I'll call an accessory mount. And this swivels on the bottom of the base, and it gives another dog hole to mount other stuff. In addition to the grinder, I use a flex shaft, and that has its own motor which hangs on this post. And I have that in... I have a little dowel that engages a dog hole, and I could put it into one of these dog holes in the top, but if the top is tilted, that doesn't work. So this way it has its own independent dog hole, and I can put it wherever I want. Though it's a little precarious the way this attaches on here. So it's a work in progress. Now this mount is also for the dust collection, which is also a work in progress. Alright, let's back together. So this worked pretty well. I would say it's effective about halfway across the table. So it's kind of the problem with my whole swiveling idea with the dust collection is if there's something in the middle, okay, it stays in the middle as you rotate it, but if it's over here, when you rotate it, it ends up over here. So now it's pretty far away from the port. So it would be kind of nice if this could like telescope out over the table like really easily, but I don't quite know how to do that yet. Kind of the problem with dust collection with this is this hose. This hose is a lot heavier than you might think it is, and so kind of one of my reasons for doing this in the beginning is to be able to attach the dust port to the stand so it doesn't fall over, and I can just position it wherever I want without having to worry about that. I would also like this to fold down so it's not this big huge thing, so I'm thinking maybe magnets to hold it together. So maybe just the bottom piece could come off so it could slide out. That might work. I did bring this outside with this base, but it wasn't a whole lot of fun getting that base outside. My shop is in the basement, so I have to get up the stairs, across the yard, and the place where I can do the power carving and not worry about where the mess is going is kind of far away from where the basement entrance is. So I made another base, which is lighter. And I've got that over here. So this is a tripod base, which makes it stable on uneven ground. And it's maybe 20 pounds instead of whatever this base is. This base has some advantages, being light and stable on uneven ground. It has a big disadvantage in that these legs stick out really far to make it stable, versus the concrete base, which is recessed inside of the top, which gives it like a toe kick space. So I can move around here and not worry about tripping over anything. But since the top rotates, I shouldn't have to be moving around a whole lot. So that's not really a huge problem in actual use. But it is a problem for storing it in the shop. So I want to store this up against the wall, over right where the camera is actually. And this base is not going to fit in there. So it's not going to work in the sort of normal way that I'm going to use this. So since this base isn't going to be in use all the time, I've made it knock down so I can take this apart and store it without it taking up this huge amount of space. This base ended up being actually very easy to make. I thought it was going to be a big deal doing the joinery for this base, but I came up with a pretty simple way of doing it. And turning the post, I used the same go no-go gauge to test the thickness down the length of it. So that made making the post pretty easy. It's glued up from 16 segments. The way I made the end of the leg fit the post is with a cove cut on the table saw. It took a couple of tries on a test piece to get the right angle, to get the right radius. And I had a couple of blocks of MDF glued on either side so I could go all the way to the full width of the leg and not run out of materials holding up the leg. To make the connection, there's a bolt, and originally I was going to have 2 dowels in there too, and I made this drilling guide because my dowel jig doesn't go wide enough for this leg. So this fit against the leg and I could drill through there. And then I put a cove on this so it would fit against the leg, and that aligns it this way. But I put it together with just the bolt and not the dowels, and it was plenty strong that way. So all you really need is just the one hole. Then on the opposite side of the leg, there's a larger hole to get the bolt in there, and also to get an extension on a ratchet to tighten the bolt. And then there's a big hole drilled through so you get access to the end of the bolt to put the nut on. And then there's a couple of bent fender washers on the inside of the post and a smaller bent washer on the nut over here. And that's it. Now you're probably wondering, how stable is this thing? You got this big top balanced on a 4-inch pipe. How stable could it possibly be? And if I grab the edges of this thing and try to rock it, I can make it move a little bit. How much does that matter for the intended use of this? Not at all. I had this thing outside and it had been raining quite a bit the previous week. So the ground was mushy and this thing was just wobbling all over the place if I tried to wobble it. But in actual use, that didn't matter at all. It didn't move at all. So this is great for what it's intended to use, but it wouldn't replace a normal workbench. I wouldn't want to be trying to saw dovetails on this thing, because it's gonna rock when you try to do that. But I do think because it's height adjustable, it does have some uses in the shop beyond power carving. One thing I don't like about my main workbench is that because I've maximized the storage, I really can't get my knees under there if I try to sit at it. So I can just kind of sit next to it, but I can't sit facing it. So with this, I'll be able to bring this thing up and sit on a stool and do whatever I want to do. Particularly for using the flex shaft, that's going to be nice. And because it can go down low, I think it would make a good kid's workbench. So I think it's got some uses beyond power carving, but it's not a general workbench.